Welcome to the final round of the 2002 CEDA National Tournament. Before I introduce the teams, I would like to introduce the folks who will be judging the debate. They are, if you will raise your hands, Justin Scar from Cal State Fullerton. Matt Moore from Augustana College. Jared Ellis from Lewis and Clark. Sarah Partlow from Idaho State. Sean Tippy from Southwest Texas State University. Jackie Massey from Vermont. Shanara Reed from Alabama University. Melissa Wade from Emory. John Sharp is not judging, he's just squatting up at the table. Don't encourage him. And then the final judge is Josh Martin from Chico State. Sure. Our participants in this debate on the affirmative is Fort Hays State University, Joe Ramsey and Jason Renier. And on the negative, from Michigan State, Austin Carson and Callum Matheson. Our timekeeper for this event will be Amy Dempster. Don't forget the time cross-X. All right, so without further ado, Fort Hays State University.
The history of Western thinking in the past 8 centuries has been one of replacement of ideas within a framework that has remained basically unchanged for nearly 2 millennia. Challenge to this framework of interpretation means a rearrangement of our manner of perceiving the world, and it involves a re-examination of the body of human knowledge and its structural reconstruction into a new format. Such a task appears to be far from the struggles of the present. It seems abstract and meaningless in the face of contemporary suffering, and it suggests that people can be made to change their oppressive activity by intellectual reorientation alone. All of these questions arise, however, because of the fundamental orientation of Western peoples toward the world. We assume that we know the structure of reality and must make only certain minor adjustments in the machinery that operates in order to bring our institutions into line. Immediate suffering is thus placed in juxtaposition with abstract metaphysical conceptions of the world, and because we can see immediate suffering, we feel impelled to change conditions quickly, to relieve tensions, never coming to understand how these basic attitudes toward the life and its derivative attitude toward minority groups continues to dominate the goals and activities that appear to be designed to create reforms. Vine Deloria's observations regarding reform and rethinking impelled us toward a different affirmative approach. Rather than tinkering with the current system in the hopes of concocting some chimerical plan that conforms with the dominant debate worldview, we have followed such thinking and riding down the different path in the hopes of being in the debate world differently. Our various affirmative approaches over the season have been met with an outpouring of indignation and anger from many of the traditional policy-making representatives. We understand their consternation, but insist that this topic demands a refusal of business as usual. Such a refusal must resist simplistic stereotypes and essentialisms while still maintaining the critical potential of re-examining recurrent patterns. Importantly, please note that we believe the debate matters. It matters to those who participated, and it matters to those who only come into contact with tangentially. Debate does not determine who we are. None of us can ever begin to explain how that happens. But debate does implicate who we might become. For example, debate can contribute to habituated ways of being in the world that help to constitute that, our understanding of that world, of that being. Debate also matters in terms about those whom we debate. No, this is not to say that what we do in debate necessarily will translate into what we do to those implicated outside the debate bound. Instead, what we do debate is what we do to those implicated by our debating. How many of us would say that telling an offensive joke does no harm to the impute party so long as they are not present? How many of us would say that casting ethical aspersions on the absent author matters not because, after all, the author is absent? Debate must continue to examine how debate practices matter. Vine Deloria points us in the provocative direction. Example after example could be cited, each testifying to the devastating effect of a general attitude toward the world that underlies Western approaches to human knowledge. The base of this attitude is the assumption that the world operates in certain predetermined ways, that it operates continually under certain natural laws, and that the nature of every species is homogeneous with a few real deviants. One can trace this attitude back into the Western past. Religious concepts which have since been transformed into scientific and political beliefs remain objects of belief as securely as if they had never been severed from their theological moorings. Debate need not look further than itself to recognize how securely certain beliefs about the world are held, and to notice how these assumptions sometimes predetermine the way debates transpire. Wait a minute, one might object. Debate has changed. You are now the hegemony. But this naive response fails to grapple with one of the most fundamental attitudes that underlies debate's approach to human knowledge, the one seemingly immovable object in the current relentless interrogation of debate by debate is its view of affirmation. Certainly critiques, performance, activism, genealogy, and the like have given the appearance of change, even radical change, but still, debaters continue to argue in ways that reveal ingrained, frequently unshakable beliefs about affirmation. No matter how much debate pays lip service to question its fundamental assumptions, it constantly returns to a framework of interpretation that presupposes the legitimacy and necessity of a formalized treatment of the resolution, replacing one topic for the next without ever noticing the sometimes incommensurable worlds. For example, topics are regularly interpreted as calls for action, if only in a particular debate room, if only for a specific debate round. Debaters are expected to affirm the topic by acknowledging its explicit language, and this year's obvious call for the United States federal government to substantially increase federal control throughout Indian country. Obvious, that is, despite the seemingly polyvalence of, for instance, federal control that suggests government restraint and increased government management. An Indian country that traverses the globe, one or more of the following topic areas that traverse themselves. Given debate's recent, expansive, and inclusive notion of debate practice, affirmers are allowed to affirm the topic in many different ways, to demand on the state to perform resistance, to endorse activism, activate the judge space, to advocate a plan without fiat, to overlay maps, expose capitalism, read narratives, to stand in solidarity against imperialism and for indigenous cultures, but above all to affirm, to respond to a topical appeal that obviously requires action, if only on the part of the debaters. This philosophical mandate, which intertwines any topical affirmation with a predetermined belief in human agency, testifies to the mere repetitiveness of a recent debate trend rather than any radical departure from the norm established over at least the last 5 decades. Debate theory has failed to keep pace with the rapid expansion of its knowledge base. This year's topic is the perfect opportunity for debate to interrogate its own jingoism. More importantly, however, this year's topic requires a confrontation with that provinciality. Failure to do so once again forces a devastating knowledge regime on those about whom we debate. Acquiesces to a nostalgia that harkens back to the days when debate unwittingly committed argumentative and discursive atrocities against others, consents to a violent chauvinism in the name of some bygone glory. When debate accepts the unproblematic help of its forebears to participate in debate as if nothing had changed, debate becomes an apology for further colonizations of those it purports to represent. Debate tells another offensive joke. What then should we do? The debate traditionalists ask, confirming yet again those inculcated beliefs about the world that predetermine and frame what counts as acceptable argument and affirmation. Once again, Divine DeLorean suggests another path. We see that the proper question we should have asked with respect to housing did not concern housing at all, but covered the more general question of the nature of a community. We discovered that the college application, the bilingual program, should have been transcended by questions concerning the nature of knowledge, how it is transmitted, and how it can be expanded, rather than how specific predetermined course of action can be implemented. Once we reject the absolute nature of Western conceptions of problems, we are able to see different types of questions inherent in our immediate problem areas. The immediacy we feel when observing conditions under which people live should enable us to raise new issues that contain within themselves new ways of conceiving solutions. Accepting debate's hail and affirming the topic is a problem to be solved, asks the wrong question, and invites the same answers. Merely accommodating this topic, like all topics, the debate's fundamental framework operates within an ethnocidal logic that silences perspective hostile to debate's traditional mission of making sure the trains run on time. Extraordinary differences exist between debate's resolute beliefs about the world and the richly diverse knowledge bases about those we debate. Uniform continuous time, inductive and deductive reasoning, planetary production of knowledge, ontology, the subject-object dichotomy, and a litany of other beliefs dramatically differentiate the people of Turtle Island as well as the rest of the world. Confronting this year's topic involves more than seeking after the missing element in today's society critical for indigenous survival. Affirming this topic must establish a different relationship with those about whom we debate. DeLorean recognizes the visionary possibilities violently excluded by dominant ways of being in the world. Until fundamental questions regarding the assumptions that form the basis for Western civilization are raised and new articulations for reality are discovered, the impulse to grab quickly and apparently easy answers will continue. Social conditions will continue to be described in a cause and effect logic that has dominated Western thinking for its entire intellectual lifetime. Programs will be designed that fail to account for the change in conditions that occur continuously in human society. Ideas continue to dominate our concerns, and visions will not come. How are these questions to be raised? Articulations discovered? Debate cannot rethink all of Western civilization, as skeptic cries. No, we cannot rethink all of Western thinking during debate round, nor can we suspend all judgment until such rethinking occurs. Instead, debate's current speed of reflexivity must include an examination of the everyday. It must attend to the way it worlds and the worlds of others emerge. Concentrate specifically on how this year's topic transverses time and space to solve the subject-object and renders suspect standard forms of proof and evidence. How the apparent transformation happening in debate frequently fails to rearrange its manner of perceiving the world. This reflexivity must re-examine the body of human knowledge as it relates to hegemonic Western epistemic practice brought to bear continuously whenever and wherever debate confronts this and any other topic. Debate about so-called federal control throughout Indian country exceeds this time, this space, Columbus, Sheridan, Bentray, Wake Forest, airport lounges, and the bison. Ah, the bison. Any germane topical affirmation must rebuke debate's narrow disciplinary, must engage the topic's diverse beliefs, re-examine and rearrange fundamental conceptions such as agency, dissent, language, reality, policy, argument, and the like. Affirm this topic in its everydayness, as transversal dissent, temporally and spatially. Affirm this topic as a vision. Repudiate the easy solutions so often offered by debate. Resist violent, nostalgic impulses, and embrace the possibility of another world vision every day.
All right. Your DeLoria evidence talks about creating a new way of having a relationship with those who we've discussed in the debate community. What kind of new relation do you propose?
What we're speaking of is that so often when we create affirmatives, when we start the year, we start the topic, we have this literature base that is the appropriate literature base, and we delve into that literature base, find the appropriate harms, areas, and then we try to solve immediate suffering. What DeLoria is talking about is to let those knowledge bases about people whom we debate about and that influence us to bleed into our views of debate. And one way we think that is productive is his idea of visions. And he says that the problem so often is that we try to create fantastic plans, that we try to end immediate suffering quickly, and a vision is a way to...
That's not exactly my question. My question is not just what do you think this does. My question is, how does the last few words in your first speech, which include this argument that you affirm a vision of the topic, what vision do you propose? You've obviously thought about these things. I'm sure when you wrote this, you had a lot of understanding of this. What do you think from what you know?
This is important. That the vision is not something that can be described. That's sort of the point. Is a vision is, we believe at least in part, stands in juxtaposition to ideas. That we should stop treating the world like it's like there's these natural laws that we can divide and conquer the world and know the world, and instead we should let the world come to us.
Topic, right?
We affirm the topic as a vision, not a vision of the topic. As a vision, it's a way of thinking. It's a way of perceiving.
Federal control is the vision that you affirm. What is
We affirm the topic as a vision, not one word of the topic or whatever.
That the United States
entire
federal
topic
government
as a vision.
Federal control over Indian country. That's what you affirm as a vision. What's good about that vision? What's to affirm?
Don't think about it like we've got a plan that's a vision. It's a way of reconceptualizing the world. We think that way of reconceptualizing the world is specifically important in relationship to the topic, to the language in the topic, and that we should affirm that vision in relation to the topic.
Understood. You also say that we should try and understand the way that other people create their worlds, that the people that we discuss in the topic create their worlds. How do you go about this?
We believe that partially happened in the 1AC when we talk about Deloria's notion of vision.
Okay, which is a discussion of how some Native Americans view the world, their own worlds.
Some.
You also argue...
Not only Native
of course
Americans.
Not. Some people, but including Native Americans, which is why we're talking about it in this topic, arguably, rather than other topics. You also say that that an imperial system exists stretching back 2,000 years. I take it you consider yourselves...
An imperial way of thinking.
I take it you consider yourselves at least somewhat participants, or at least subjects of the colonial system. So are Austin and I. So are largely all the people in the room, I imagine. Thank you.
Peace, Power, and Righteousness. Dylan S. Meyer was the director of the War Relocation Authority operating in the sunny state of California. Meyer's job was to confine Japanese Americans in concentration camps. Dylan Meyer just wanted to help. His experience qualified him, fortunately, to direct the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where he continued his work. My representative vision of control, one which continues to this day. His liberal vision of reform is an example of what the act critiques, but this vision will not simply stop. It is fully confident in itself and self-replicating. Drinnen notes in 1987, the men who ran America's concentration camps were liberals. All shared the earlier generation of reformers of the zeal to cleanse, purify, and perfect industrial America by imposing an orderly existence on immigrants, criminals, lunatics, and idiots, and prostitutes, on Native Americans, on everybody. Myers was a white-clean expression of this blind faith. The friendly company maintained a great psychic distance from sickness, especially when they were of a different complexion. The Myers policy has been enunciated decades earlier. The common property and civilization cannot coexist. Ultimately, this white Anglo-Saxon Protestant accent went back at least as far as the Puritan drive to banish history from the world, strip it to its human idiosyncrasies, and subject it to regimented reason. It had existed a very long time before Meyer and straightened down to the instant moment as the new crop of terminations makes all too clear. And throughout, it has represented the root of America's absolutism, the sober faith that its norms are self-evident. Finally, Meyer has settled into his proper historical context. His long career raises issues as close to the pronouncements of a member of Ronald Reagan's cabinet. It's promoted as the European invasion of a continent, professional remover and relocator. Meyer imposed compulsory assimilation on both Native Americans and Japanese Americans in the service of the same, yet prejudices as Taylor, as a terminator. He was both no more and no less than a carrier of America's absolutism. It was meant to be a WASP values. Right now, out there in the BIA or some other agency, there is a Meyer-like colonizer more than willing to step in as another liberator of Indians, treat their reservation as concentration camps, cuts their ties to past and future generations. An accident chronology has marked the underlying meaning of Meyer's termination policy. Has been under commission of the BIA before directed WRA, and the continuing continuity stretching from the reservation of the camps could have hardly been missed. Just as this termination of Native Americans, then the relocation of ghettos, so is the relocation of Japanese Americans across the country meant the termination of their communities. The WRA under Meyer was not a mistake, but a logical outcome of 3 centuries of American experience. And under the BIA, Meyer was not a mistake, but an explicit reversion of the ingrained racist themes explored and fought on behalf of the liberal Native Americans. The affirmative presents a vision of federal control. No matter what you think of their argument, it is still a vision, a description of Native Americans and the federal government, even if it is a highly atypical one. But we believe that the vision of control are not to be affirmed. Control is bad. Even if federal control collapses, areas subvert themselves, or transversal dissent exerts continuities in the debate, the system is not stable. This topic is still fundamentally incorrect. And what I see is, in its own way, seeks a solution. We argue that this is not only contradictory, but in this case, self-defeating. We are all debaters, and if they are correct, we are participating in a corrupt system. We have not altered the system over the years. We have made it more coherent. Everyone has debated 4 cases. Everyone has heard of transversal dissent in Bleecker in 2000. But as their message spreads, it warps itself. Their message is unclear. Do they affirm control? Condemn it. Are they debating or anti-debating? Imperialism is too broad, too old, too experienced to simply to roll over and die. Even they admit that it cannot all be reformed. Any participation in this concert will corrupt us. Alpha Nuts in 1999. The brutal regime of European technological advancement intended domination, confronted the opposite of indigenous societies, resulting in their extinction. Indigenous people created a vacuum which European regime established to put a economic philosophical dominance. At their core, European states and their colonial offspring still provided the same destructive, disrespectful impulses they did 500 years ago. Questions of justice, social, political, environmental, or all best concerned outside the framework of the European thought, political traditions, indigenous traditions on their repository, vast experience, and deep insight on achieving balance and harmony. It is a question of attitude. We should never endorse a cooperation or a vision that is complicit with the genocidal U.S. government. Now, we continues to 1999. Even if it's not possible to change the system from within, individuals' action within the system do matter. We can accept or reject, promote or hinder the state's agenda. Contention is the opposite end of the reaction spectrum from co-option. It is not cooperative, not participatory vision. It should be a state, its actors, and its policies. It's met with the kind of marginally progressive halfway measures before the state to appease the less committed among us. Instead, it demands accountability for the underlying power relations, the state's domination of our existence, to refuse to be drawn to maintain the colonial system, and takes a firm stance in defense of the principles that conform to the core of indigenous nations. We must stop trying to understand the Native perspective, stop analyzing, stop reaching out. Face it, we are products, participants, and contributors to an imperial system much more complex and insidious than we can easily conceive of. We have debated this topic all year. We've discussed nuclear testing, which is topical, uranium mining, tax law, water rights, gambling, sovereignty, and colonialism. We are thus pieces of a colonial apparatus and holders of knowledge. What we know in a time of ruthless resource exploitation is a potential resource. Native Americans are the targets of genocide. Instead of knowing them, we should uphold their invisibility. Spanos, 2000, having systematized the estrangement latent in the exilic conditions of the emigrant, the uncanny ability to see what the point of view of the imperial discourse of dominant culture is otherwise invisible. The past life of immigrants, as we know it, is developed because anything that is not reified ceases to exist. It is consigned to their background. The emigrant becomes spectral, who haunts the being of the imperial culture that is reduced and referred to non-being. Science recognizes the disabling aspects of faith, but does not blind him, as it does so many progressive, postmodern, post-colonial thinkers, to the virtues and possibilities of the spectrum of marginalization. They are worth exploring. There is not just another negative position of virtues, there is also the possibility for the challenge of the system, describing it in language unavailable to those that it has already subdued. But case debate. First argument, the act is a double turn on itself. Case in point, the 1AC links to its own critique of problem solution Western thinking. It starts by foregrounding the dangers of Western thinking and then proceeds to consider the ways in which our current being within the debate world functions, and it does ask the question of who should be done with the ways in which it refers to topic. Don't worry, the answer is not far behind the question. The 1AC answers a rather detailed and frankly plan-like list of specific things that we should do, a vision to affirm the topic. They say that we need to include an examination of the everyday, dissolve subject object, render suspect standard forms of proof of evidence, etc. Their call to affirm transversal dissent in the everydayness of the topic is a call to action. There their own arguments refute. At B's point, this is a reason to reject and turn their project. Deloria continues in the paragraph after their own paragraph in the 1AC, which ends in new ways of conceiving solutions. Deloria in 1999. An old Indian study captures the radical difference between Indians and Western peoples quite adequately. The white man the Indians maintain has ideas. Indians have visions. Ideas have a single dimension that require a chain of connected ideas to make sense. The connections are made between ideas can lead to great insight, so they can lead to the inexorable logic of catch-22, in which logic never leads to the polar opposite of the original proposition. A vision, on the other hand, presents a whole picture of experience and has a central meaning that stands on its own feet as an independent revelation. This evidence talks about requiring a chain of connected ideas to make sense. If this doesn't remind you of the 1AC, I'm not sure what does. The next is that their form of resistance doesn't prevent entrenching domination. Transversalism is universal and doesn't solve. Bleecker in 2000, despite engendering powerful hidden mechanisms to change, everyday forms of resistance are not unproblematic. Like more open forms of dissent, they are certainly not immune to from the retrenching of discursive forms of domination. Here, the works of Elias is illustrated for his subversive writings with views on women, undoubtedly supported of existing patriarchal practices. And turn their 1AC acts as an anchor, crushing transversal agency. Their ending in a vision of affirming the topic is a reason to reject them. Bleecker in 2000, a discursive notion of human agency is grounded precisely in this recognition that there is no end to circles of revealing and concealing. Anything else would suggest a static view of the world, one which human agency is an ally, one which the future can never tear down the boundaries of the present, just as if the interactions of domination and resistance has no end. Efforts at coming to terms with them will never rise to the stage of ultimate insight. The approach to understanding dissent in human agency must remain useful only as long as it resists the temptation of digging deeper by anchoring itself in a newly discovered essence, a stable foundation that can bring the illusion of order and certainty to the world. Their 1AC is runs counter to Bleeker's project. Their attempt to unify this dissent into an overarching whole destroys the Bleecker once again in 2000. The gates between these partial insights to raise them to a higher level by squeezing each of its fragments into an overarching whole would annihilate the unique vantage point from which Wednesday was sought to shed light into global politics. The result is preconceived and subjective mental image imposed upon a set of idiosyncratic social dynamics. One more art concealing is closing of the very deep space I'm trying to open throughout the book. And their articulation of agency is too exclusive. One theory can explain dissent. Lawson in 2001. More grounded notions of human agency. Bleecker seems to fear represent simply another grab for power that only with further risks to human agency. Ironically, the process of making this argument, Bleecker tends to render dichotomous understanding of agency, which is only exercised in opposition to domination. It strikes me as over the restrictive view of human agency. The agency is also involved in the creative production of the novel concept of social order and meaning. Ultimately, Bleeker's efforts to theorize human agency distract him from the exploration of transversal forms of dissent and concrete historical perspectives, and in the end, we're left to wonder whether one needs to be an abstract philosophical theory of agency as Bleecker applies in order to actually decide and make decisions and to act as a human agent. I prefer to think that. Next, the 1AC is incomplete. Bleecker argues that focusing on one vantage point, i.e. the vision of affirming the topic, conceals the truth of dissent can never work. Bleecker against 2000. Such an approach entails a constant moving back and forth between theory and practice, abstraction and everydayness, space and time, discourse and domination, and possibilities for dissent and the rise of the vision in them. Each of them study our sides are crucial. Each offers a unique vantage point, but none of them holds the key to ultimate insight. Indeed, every process for revealing is at the same time a process of concealing that way open perspective, no matter how insightful this one conceals something that is visible from the vantage point. This frames that occurs over the risk of such processes of revealing. Finally, transversal dissent can't topple entrenched power relations. Bleecker 2000 discursively entrenched power relations constantly by toppled by next demonstrations or transversal practice of dissent and transgression of political boundaries to not necessarily offer deeply entrenched forms of discursive domination, the form of resistance and too deeply embedded in the existing discursive order is likely to entrench corresponding systems of inclusion. So I stand up for cross-examination. Shirley, here's a list of the What's up?
Have you ever gone, like, you try to go to sleep at night, and you really want to go to sleep, but you can't really stop thinking, and things come to you, and continue to come to you, and you really can't quiet your mind? Has that ever happened to you?
Never.
Never? My question is...
Of course I have, yeah.
My question is, how does something become invisible? Especially something that for the last year we've had an engagement with people. How do indigenous people become invisible? How will we go about that process?
Why do you think that's something that we need to engage with or explain?
Am I wrong about that?
I don't know if you're wrong about this. I'm trying to figure out. Right. Our argument is not how do you become invisible. Our argument is that we should uphold invisibility.
What's that mean?
Our argument, can I help answer this?
Sure.
Our argument is that your claim, which we should produce new visions of understanding, we should try and understand the visions of Native Americans, is essentially a seek and destroy tactic. While you may not intend it that way, we, as the agents of colonialism and as implicated in our intellectual resources,
throw up our
be
hands.
exploited.
Mum's the word. Yeah?
Throw up our hands?
Throw up our hands. Mum's the word.
Exactly? No.
No? What's the alternative then?
Our alternative isn't silence in the Northwestern FG sense. Our alternative is that we, rather than seeking out, rather than attempting to understand Native American visions, should do precisely the opposite, because the more people that know who are members of the imperial culture, the more attempts there are to mine us for potential use, our resources against Native Americans.
What is the goal of an affirmative debate round?
What is the goal of an affirmative debate round?
The role.
it doesn't particularly matter. You've chosen a role, and we've said that your role is incorrect. I'm not a debate theorist. I hate that stuff. I hate pigs and disco. I just want to debate.
One of your link arguments is that we affirm the vision of federal control.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, you said that.
Is it just that we say the words federal control?
No,
I mean,
no,
because
it's-
our 1AC is pretty
remember-
explicit about the way
Okay.
that those words unravel themselves.
Right. Okay, the words unravel themselves. Exactly. We use that language in our 1C link explanation. Our argument is that the words can unravel themselves, but in the end, the judges still have to evaluate whether or not affirming those words as presently constructed in the resolution
Why
is a
does
good
when the judge
idea.
decide they affirm it as presently constructed when the 1AC calls into question those constructions?
Okay, that's fantastic. And our argument throughout this debate is going to be that your 1AC is a beautiful work of prose that ends with a concept of a vision of affirming a resolution that you spent the rest of your 1AC refuting. Our argument will be that endorsing a vision of the United States federal government should substantially increase federal control throughout Indian country is not a way to exercise transversal dissent, and if it is not net beneficial, that instead we should say no to federal control. It is a more effective mode of demonstrating our resistance to that type of federal control, and that your affirmative essentially ends in a statement which it refutes itself.
We shouldn't take a chance in hoping that the system collapses on itself.
The Delorier evidence, the 1AC talks about how there's a hegemony within the West that assumes it basically knows the world. It takes certain assumptions for granted. These are assumptions about time, space, reason, ontology, agency, subjectivity, causality, knowledge, and a whole host of other assumptions. These fundamental orientation towards the world is one that enacts domination with style thinking that denies the infinite multitudes of different ways of being in the world. It's epicidal. It's Walter Bigelow in 2000. A consequent description of other thinking is a way of thinking is not intended to dominate, humiliate. The way of thinking is universally marginal, fragmentary, and unachieved, and as such, it's not epicidal. It's not society. Societies which talking, writing, take place without heard, and the planetary production of knowledge. It's not societies, even they speak, are not listened to. They're different. So Delorier evidence talks about how challenging this framework means a rearrangement of our manner of perceiving the world. We think that that's a valuable enterprise within the debate forum. We don't seek the rejection of ideas, neither does the Delorier evidence. Is talking about how we need to open it up to allow for other ways of being in the world, as their own Delorier evidence says in the part that they don't read. This uncertainty is liberating in a much more fundamental way than any other development in the history of Western civilization. It means that religious, political, economic, and historical analysis of human activities that have been derived from the Western tradition do not have an absolute claim on us. We are free to seek a new synthesis that draws information from every culture and every period of human history and has boundaries only as a requirement that it makes more sense and more data than any other synthesis. Even the initial premise of such a synthesis can be different from what we have previously used to begin our formulation of that picture of reality. Our argument is that we can draw from each of all these different cultures and ways in which they can be positive and productive in our everyday lives. That Delorier evidence is really specific about how it can be a synthesis. It doesn't require an absolute rejection of the Western system of rationality or anything like that. Rather, it's a way in which we can be in the world inclusively. Our argument is the ways in which we approach the world of the West is dominating right now, and that needs to be ruptured. This domination occurs in our approach to the world, but it specifically extends to academic debates, such as our approach to language. The language we use assumes a very specific lingo. The idea that our approach, for instance, the approach to the flow, the demand for a judicial affirmation of the resolution, the assumption that like the vowel represents what went down the debate. We make assumptions about literality. The words correspond to essential hidden ideas. The syntax flows from left to right across the page. Then each word has its own distinct meaning, and that meaning is something that has an inevitable effect on us. That the subject sentence is separate from the object sentence. There's so many assumptions to go into our approach to language. However, this is a very narrow way of viewing language. We have to break open these linguistic structures to allow for other possibilities for liberation. White in 2000. How can one turn language from a method of domination to an instrument of resistance? Challenges the practice of domination and attempts to open up vacant space must engage in a struggle with conventionally recognized linguistic practices. Dissent cannot be separated from critique of language, for it remains ineffective as long as it does not interfere with the ways in which linguistic systems of exclusion constitute and objectivize social practices. The Delorier and Bigelow evidence go further to talk about how this notion of how language operates in a singular way only causes that style of domination, which we assume, for instance, the idea moves from one idea to the next idea, They say that we've linked back into our affirmative by you speaking in the English language or something. However, our affirmation of the resolution as a vision is an attempt to deny that literality. That means that which is straight turn to their arguments about how we just need to walk away from the resolution because it makes an assumption about the reading of the resolution that is distinctly Western. Our argument is that it's productive in the ways in which we can deny those things. Also, our argument is about how there's multiple different meanings to all the words of the resolution. We give the example how, for instance, the Indian country means more than just the continental United States. It means it means the soldiers, the American soldiers in Vietnam spoke about Vietnam as Indian country. The federal control means more than just power over. It can mean restraint of. It can mean as well as control over the states, or however, in many different ways people interpreted control for their affirmations for resolution. Our argument is that it's necessary to break open these concepts to allow for a liberation from those imposed meanings. That the way to step away from the hegemonic view of control and power is within that as a form of resistance, like in 2000. The daring task to open up the concepts and not fit into the concepts to resist destroying power and return the conceptual to the non-conceptual. The first step towards a disassociating concept is simply to refuse to define it monologically. One cannot eliminate the contradictory, the fragmentary, and the discontinuous. Contradictions are only contradictions. One assumes the existence of a prior universal standard of reference. Besides, specifically, our argument is that within the debate forum that can be productive because it allows us to challenge our notions of pluralism. That when we approach the topic with a specific intent, i.e., that we already know what those words mean in the topic, that allows for us to deny the specific topic areas that we're talking about. Or what we can do is in our interpretations instead allow the peoples and the arguments and the knowledge base that we're talking about to infect the way in which we interpret that topic. This allows for that transdisciplinarity that the Bleicher evidence they read talks about. In fact, I usually read one of the cards that they read in the 2NC in my 2AC about the interdisciplinarity, the need to step back and forth between different bodies of literature. These different bodies of literature are the ideas of, for instance, the international relations literature that Bleicher's engaged in, as well as the indigenous literature that the Delore evidence is engaged in, as well as academic debate in the sense that we engage in a discipline right here, and we're debating about that discipline. And the failure to do so only means that we participate in the very concealing of different avenues of resistance that they would have you do, because they say to walk away from this resolution, to not affirm it. And in essence, what they're doing is only guaranteeing the hegemony of that interpretation of the resolution. Embracing transversality is critical to busting out of these disciplinary boundaries. We affirm the resolution as transversal because the world does not conform itself to those disciplines. The boundaries are constantly in flux, and easy identification and classification is no longer possible. That is the failure to break down these boundaries engages in ethicide, as the medieval evidence talks about. And for that reason, we also affirm the resolution and its everydayness. Traditional theories of dissent are defunct because they rely on singular notions of action, i.e. great events. That they talk about how you just need to say no to the resolution as if that could cause some sort of great event of causality, and then we've escaped the federal control of this debate topic. This debate topic exists whether or not you like it. And our arguments we have to come to grips with that in our everyday lives. In that everydayness, we should affirm the resolution as a vision which allows us to counter those dominant ways of viewing the world. In other words, the approach it is a way in which those things come to us in multitudes of different ways, rather than just that singular, rational, logical notion of the resolution. The failure to come to grips with those different forms of action and agency only enacts domination because we assume that we already have the answers before we even ask the questions. Weicker in 2000. Grand theories uphold a specific image extent, the foreclosed alternatives, and thereby runs the risk of entrenching some forms of domination. Popular dissent, unable to deal with subtle forms of domination. To acknowledge this is to take one more step and shift away from grand theories towards an articulation of human agency is not grounded in stable foundation, revolves around the discursive understanding of power relations. The Delore evidence and the Delore evidence goes further and talks about how domination is located in our orientation towards the world. This may seem abstract, however, the ways of thinking that we engage in directly affect the policies that are enacted. Resistance requires a slow transformation of values in everyday practice. Said that it's not these heroic practices that you can somehow just reject something, rather occurs in these everyday practices of Leicher 2000. Once one conceptualizes global politics, a series of overlapping transversal struggles, various new forms of dissent come into view. Human agency takes place in a variety of other, often mundane or unrecognized domains. Dissent is no longer solely associated with mass uprisings. Transversal dissent located in countless non-heroic practices make up the realm of everyday life and its multiple connections with global life. The Bleicher evidence that they read against us doesn't assume our affirmative, because we're not claiming that Bleicher is an absolute solvency. Their argument, even attacking great events, is the very argument that we're making. Of course, that this style of resistance is not immune to co-optation. However, the only way we can have that resistance is through this slow transformation of cultural values, because the Bleicher evidence talks about how Bleicher's talking about how we can't make assumptions about causality or static notions of agency, because to do that is to enact domination. That means within this form, the way in which dissent occurs is necessarily without those linear notions of causality. Also, is the fact that we don't anchor ourselves in these particular views. We don't claim that there's an absolute truth. In fact, our Delore evidence is kind of specific about how it's just a dominating way of viewing the world that necessarily negates it. We have to look for a new synthesis between multiple different cultures. Their last Bleicher card only proves why to vote affirmative, because we are not that grand theory. The Lawson evidence they talk only turns their attempt to step outside of the system, because it says we need to engage in practical forms of dissent that doesn't apply to us, because we are attempting that type of practical dissent within this type of form in which we can engage in those things. We believe that we are the middle ground between the Lawson evidence and the Leiker evidence because Lawson is criticizing Leiker's notion of Leiker's attempt to negate agency. Rather, I think it's a misreading of Leiker. However, we provide a way in which we can have agency within that world which accommodates the Lawson evidence and the Leiker turns, what's so-called they call them. The Spano's argument is only offense for us because they need to question ontological grounding and embrace the spectral difference. This does not mean that we should not have politics in this context in a way in which we can agree that the 1AC only links to okay. The 1AC criticizes those very notions of how we need to oppose the world. Look, we're not saying that all rationality is bad. We're not saying that like problem solution, as they talk about it, they say the double intrinsic case. That's not our claim. Rather, it's opening up to different ways of being the world that's valuable. I think that Deloria is evidence is on point to that. The idea that we need a new synthesis among many different cultures.
Let's talk about what your vision is of voting negative, okay? You seem to me to describe in the 2AC that you think that voting negative is telling us to walk away from the resolution with our current understanding of what the resolution means. Is that right?
Well, you say federal control is always bad, so always say no to the resolution.
Okay, so let's say, what do you think our interpretation, what do you think the people in this crowd and the 9 judges here, what do you think their interpretation of the resolution is now? What is their understanding of federal control? Do they think it's good or bad?
In a universal sense, or like for the context of this debate round?
I don't know, you seem to say that there's some kind of static notion of what we think of it right now.
In the context of this debate round, our affirmation is not of that traditional notion of control. It's of that vision of the resolution, which does not mean literal. You can't separate out those words and say federal government here, federal control here, Indian country over here.
The separation argument doesn't apply to us. We're saying
it does,
your
because
vision
your definition relies on that.
Our argument is that your vision of endorsing the words the U.S. federal government should substantially increase federal control. We're saying that you should walk away from that because everyone in this room will walk away from that if you vote negative and walk away from that and think that federal control is bad. If you can, how can you win this as an offensive argument unless you can prove that we should have any other understanding of federal control than federal control is bad?
I mean, our Deloria evidence that talks about how when you think you know the nature of reality such that you can say control objectively bad, that engages in domination.
This is not the truth. This is not what we're saying. We're not saying that this is the objective truth, okay? I recognize personally, Callum recognizes personally, federal control may be good, federal control may be bad. But the question is, what does our community and what do these 9 judges walk away from this debate with?
I think
is
it
it an understanding?
Is it of our manner of perceiving the world?
Okay, if we win, that regardless of whether or not it's true, that it's net beneficial or better strategically for us to walk away from this debate thinking that federal control is bad, what is the reason why you should vote affirmative? Does your evidence provide an offensive warrant in a world where we say that federal control is bad, even if it's not the objective truth?
Yes, because it's the idea that before we make that statement, we need to, first of all, allow silent societies into our planetary production of knowledge. We need to reorient our way of perceiving the world. That before we make that statement, before we say, I'm going to leave this room and say federal control bad, that you better damn well take different perspectives into mind and reorient that. That's, I mean, the Deloria evidence is
denial of federal control. What if the denial of federal control, the reduction or elimination of federal control, is a precondition to our integration of that type of knowledge, to our understanding of the transversal nature of resistance, of any of that stuff? Why if we prove that getting rid of federal control?
I don't know where it happens in a case where you can prove that, because I disagree with that premise.
One thing that we have heard all year is that Native Americans are the targets of genocide. I want this to really sink in. Here's an extended version of a card that North Texas reads in their 1AC. It's from Freeburg in 2000. Take the American people to task in the matter of genocide against indigenous populations, face a terrible taboo. Registered in the don't you dare category of academic do's and don'ts. This act of transgression does not derive from vacuum, but rather emanates from specific social consciousness or lack thereof. While Hitler's policy of Livingstone politics has been vilified and condemned to national metaphysics of Indian hating with such a formation of national identity, political policy in the United States. White man's burden of winning the West was a crushing global folly. The West was quite literally nowhere or everywhere for North American tribal policies of like the West was not a dark and bloody ground to be won for Anglo-Americans. It was exactly that for conquest. The West was at the bottom of performance society, even on our round earth. Winning the West amounted to no less than winning the world. For 4 centuries after Columbus, the ideology of the master race firmly established itself in American soil. The ideology of manifest destiny is transferred from one generation to another, so there's no need for the kind of propaganda machine required to make willing executions of ordinary men and women, Americans, and their drafted forward. One nation fought with God on their side, Eurocentric, the racial conception of the indigenous peoples reflecting scholarly writings is now so complete. The second nation of most Americans is passed under popular and common knowledge that no intent to distort the truth is any longer necessary. All that's required is the recitation of a rote learning and passive and uncritical generation generation from the next. There's a particular kind of hatred born of the guilt and privilege of living with 3 generations of complicity each day. We who hold the position of privilege must come face to face with those who we have dispossessed, the others who rightfully share the complicity, and the old Indians are far away and long ago. For most of these people, reflection consists of allowing wisdom to approach and seeking answers to self-generated questions such as attitude, stance, and polarized opposition to the manner in which society today conducts itself. There are a couple of things that we shouldn't forget about on this topic. Look, we have learned a few things from debating this topic all year. One of them is that we are amidst an act of genocide. This vision of the topic cannot be redeployed. Even Fort Hayes has changed over time. They used to read almost no evidence. Now they're 2 and C reads a dozen cards. They still don't have a plan, but it's getting closer and closer as they advocate things like redeployment of a vision. They aren't bad people, of course. None of us are bad people, probably, but we are fixated on federal control. It's the locus of what we understand. It's the locus of our vision. It's what we have to constantly come to grips with. Even if the words can change meaning, even if the whole resolution be understood as a single united vision, it's wholly irrelevant because the concept of it spreads beyond. There's an argument which isn't responded to in the 2HC, which I believe is probably true, which is that even if their transversal dissent has effects beyond our community, even if it spreads to other people, they will not always be there to interpret the effects of this, which means that resolution of the topic, you vote affirmative, people don't know what happens. The thing that spreads is a genocidal ideology. We are essentially the keepers of concentration camps, an argument which they concede. Our evidence about Dylan Meyer describes the way that he was chosen to head the BIA because he had formerly led the Japanese relocation program. In other words, he had experience in controlling and destroying people. Even though Dylan Meyer honestly wanted to help, his knowledge was redeployed in a way that was violent and destructive, and they have conceded an argument that in the modern age there is nothing that we know, there is no resource that is safe, nothing inside my brain cannot be extracted by the right agent for the right price, for the right amount of electricity, for the right amount of exposure to heat or cold or anything else. We are essentially like concentration camp guards standing around. We are dissenting from the system. We want people that we were supposed to watch over to escape. Their way of doing so is to understand the maps that Native Americans have, to see where they run to get out of the reservation/concentration camp. They want to understand their perspective. They want the silence to be included in their world. They want to see what is going on inside their heads. Our alternative instead is to close our eyes and throw open the gates to allow them to escape without knowing where they're going, which means that no manner of extraction, no amount of interrogation can turn up the answer to where they are. Our argument is consistent with 99% of what the affirmative advocates, their vision of the world of knowledge, their rejection of Western knowledge, etc. Our only question is how and what and why do we do these things. There's essentially no impact in their argument, to use traditional debate speak, and there's no implication to these arguments, which captures our argument about genocide, an argument made in the 1NC. We can't open up control completely. They've conceded our arguments. We're agents of genocide. They agree with us in the cross-examination. How do we position ourselves as these people? Our outward evidence answers this question, that the drive for Euro-American domination is nearly unstoppable. Instead, we should not intellectually align ourselves with this concept. You should not intellectually align yourself with the idea of affirmation. Their topic is one that you shouldn't vote for. They say that you shouldn't make these absolute knowledge claims, but then they say that maybe they don't reject all Western nationality, etc. Pin them to something. You've all coached against Fort Hayes before. I know this is virtually impossible, but we will make a good stab at it. They say that our understanding that control is always evil is a bad one. However, they have failed to come up with a counterexample. I cannot think of a counterexample in the history of the United States of America where control over Native Americans did anything productive, where control throughout Indian country was productive, and it doesn't matter what our traditional understanding is. Why take the risk that the topic transverses itself, that like Samson, we can pull the pillars of the temple down on top of ourselves? Why instead should we escape the temple? Should we let other people to break free rather than attempt to redeploy language that has never been redeployed successfully in the past despite challenges by innumerable people over hundreds of years? Imperialism is an old and smart system. They are evil, but they are not stupid, which means that we cannot always escape these systems. Our Alfred evidence describes the situation. What should you do in this context? You should look away from colonialism. I remember when Alfred stood in the exact position that I'm standing now, and he was asked the question, how can we redeploy federal control? Is there ever a way to make it benign? His one-word answer, followed by a paragraph later, was no, and that is the answer now. Don't affirm their topic. It's an evil one. Rejection of their stable truth as well as another concept. They say that control doesn't always mean one thing. However, control is always genocidal. Their argument essentially extends to allowing the denial of the Holocaust, the defamation of the dead. Barbara and Sherry in 97 with regard to the Holocaust, and the truth appears particularly imperative, protection of the possibility of identifying some simple reality or truth beyond the constant self-referentiality of linguistic construct challenges the need to establish a reality truths of the Holocaust. Scholars like can only respond with more the co-option of their ideas in the setting. Indeed, legal radical multiculturalists themselves who clearly recognize Holocaust denial as dangerous nonsense until the Holocaust myth is defame the dead as a deep harm to living horrified mass of radical multiculturalists cannot limit the use of their theories by others. Radical multiculturalists allow the Holocaust denial to flourish and be treated as the other side, another point of view, or a different perspective, because deconstruction is Margaret's experience was relative and nothing was fixed. It created an atmosphere of permissive discourse, questioning meaning, historical myths, made it hard for proponents to assert that there was anything off limits for the skeptical approach. Our Freeburg evidence establishes this is the American genocide that goes on. We are in no other position, no position less severe than the other witnesses of genocide that have historically been perpetrated. Our question is how you orient yourself towards that. Should you play around with the ideology of the colonizer? It's dangerous. You put it down. You don't spread it. Our evidence says that their denial of the evil nature of of control is essentially a continuation of this policy. They say that they can embrace other cultures, that we shouldn't allow silence, etc. But our Spanos evidence only goes, it's not offense for them, it goes in the opposite direction. They probably didn't read our Spanos evidence. It's not talking about ontology so much as it's talking about the transversal ways that other people challenge the system. We should not attempt to know them. We should not attempt to cooperate with their worldviews. Rather, we should close our eyes so we don't know where they would go. We are all imperialist agents. We are in a forum full of hundreds of people, all of whom are parts of a giant machine bent on the destruction of Native Americans. We are witnessing genocide, and we should not participate in it. Our Spanos evidence says that these people themselves can resist, that the targets of genocide have a path to resistance that is not open to those of us who have already been co-opted by the dominant system of ideology, etc. We participate in an activity which they call genocidal sometimes, which they call corrupt at the very least, which they say that has a unidirectional focus on the destruction of peoples, that relies on Western logocentrism. All of this is correct, which is precisely why we should give up. We should seal the topic now. We already know that genocide's going on. We know that we have a part in it. We know about uranium mining and nuclear testing and all these things. The horrors that are evinced right now, they say that they're a practical action. Quite the opposite. Their action doesn't do anything to solve this. Look, their claim to go back and forth between practical actions and being the middle ground between our evidence just isn't true. They can't recapture these arguments. They can't deploy this argument in a way that is beneficial for them. It's quite the opposite. Our argument is that silence, allowing other people to take their actions against the state unknown, unguided, undetected by us, is good because our knowledge is just seek and destroy mechanisms. Spanos in 2000 was precisely the Vietnamese explanation of the very unpleasant conditions that are forced to find our formidable imperial culture, the strange colonized space, and disintegrated both the cultural narrative and the decision-oriented imperial practice of narrative design to enable the Vietnamese transform the United States American crime strategy to reduce the unaccountable dimension of all their non-consent percentage silence and disability for the doctors and imperial cases with the transformation effect of reification of enabled establishment will process by the what's spectral invisibility to disable the otherwise impenetrable operations of reification that return the most powerful nation in the history of the world to counter reformist initiative of liberties of liberal sororities without social discourse can be expansible in the imperial language before the idea of Americans or the resonantly silent imperative of the American intellectuals of the left. Their argument will always be that they capture this evidence. They will constantly say that they adopt our perspective of challenging knowledge, etc., but they do not. The fundamental point of their Deloria evidence of their investigation is to get to a perspective where we can better understand what goes on, when we can have a new vision of the topic. Our argument is that we should close our eyes. Their visions of federal control are defined in evil ways. Regardless of their intent, the dominant vision of federal control limits the perspectives that we can have. We should not cooperate with the system. Rather, their resolution is a vision of dominance and deserves to be rejected. Collins and Hall in 94, there's no single answer for all Indian nations. A single vision imposed and said there must be a kaleidoscope of visions turned out of hand of Indian nations, but the stones within the kaleidoscope are often limited by the reality of what opportunities give extends to Indian nations. The dominant society is not in control of the vision, it's not in control of access to many stones, the stones of knowledge, political power, economic development, the stones are not in vision of sovereignty, environmental protection, economic success. The dominant society's vision must stand beside those of Indian people who are discovering the full range of vision. How do you want to end this topic? How do you want to resolve the last debate of the year? Do you want to say that federal control can be redeployed, that has a chance of redemption, or do you want to condemn it for what it is, a system of violent destruction which has no hope for indigenous peoples, none that they can name and none that I can think of?
Okay, you pointed over your shoulder and pointed at the evil, and I guess I wanted to know what the evil is.
I did point over my shoulder, yes, but our argument is not that evil resides only in the ceiling tiles of this hotel. Our argument is that...
What is evil? Who is the evil? Like, you talk about how we just need to say no to these
tell you the
people.
truth, I was dying for you to ask me this kind of question. What is evil? Define evil. Make sense of evil. Our argument is that perhaps it's too late for that. For those who are the victims of genocide confined to America's new concentration camps,
and you're
these
talking
questions
about how
are
we
mental
walk
masturbation.
away from whatever it is that's evil, and I understand that you
Genocide
have some arguments going
is
about
evil.
genocide.
If I have to read a bunch of evidence to make that argument,
No, absolutely,
I quit.
but who engages in genocide? Is it everybody in this room is doing genocide, or we're witnessing genocide, or where do we decide
Isn't
who
this
we're
the
going
kind
to
of
walk away
distinction
from?
between knowledge and action that you don't want to make? Your 1AC says
That's why I
that
listed them in a line.
your
so you could say,
1AC, your 1AC says that what we know, what we talk about the topic, is what we do to these people.
All
Your
right, so
vision
is your
is a
contention
genocidal
that
one.
everyone is engaging in genocide?
That will in
at
turn
this
your
moment?
1AC, your
I'm
contention,
asking the question.
in the context of our argument, is that everyone is engaging in genocide. Our argument is we are all at least complicit in a system of massive destruction. I don't know everyone in this room. I recognize the majority of them, but I can't say what their role in an imperial machinery
Who
is.
is it
I
that
can
we're
nearly
closing our eyes
guarantee
for?
that it's pieces of
Are
it.
any of the people in here, for instance, the people who you want to liberate from this genocide?
Quite possibly.
Quite possibly.
Liberate is a big term for you. I don't think that you understand our
I
argument
read
about
Gloria, it
dissent.
said liberation.
Okay, fine.
I guess we're locked into that for this
Well, our argument isn't anything about Deloria. I was going to say that your claim that we are some grand revolution is incorrect. The revolution will not be televised. Our argument, rather, is that by closing our eyes, we do quite the opposite of your grand notion of dissent, your transversal resistance that brings the system down upon itself.
I still have yet to figure out who it is that you are protecting, or who you're letting run free. You're
Who are we
overflying,
protecting?
throwing
Who
open
do you
the
think we
gates.
are? We're
Is
the-
it are you throwing open the gates to allow genocide in?
No, we suggest that Native Americans, as defined by the government, as defined by the people of the United States, bent on their racist destruction, are the targets of genocide. I do not know them all. I do know that our attempts to understand their perspectives as you map out essentially give us the plans
How's
for
the
their
metaphor work
escapes.
in this situation?
There is
You
no
walk
metaphor.
away from federal control, but does that mean as well that you walk away from everything you view as potentially destructive or dominating?
We walk away from the affirmative. We believe that your attempt to endorse a vision of the topic, wrong direction.
At the end of this debate, you may think to yourself that transversal dissent and destabilization of linguistic stability is a good idea. The macro problem with this affirmative, however, is that this offense is crafted around a very central and poignant theme. There, Bleecker and McMillo and Deloria Edmonds explain it all, but it's wrapped around a very specific vision, a substantial increase in federal control in Indian country. They have yet to prove why, in this specific context, with this specific resolution, we should endorse the statement of federal control to illustrate the instability of language, etc. Our argument at the end of this debate will be relatively simple. We are not impact turning your exploration of transversal dissent, disciplinary power, and linguistic instability. We are saying that you have justified the idea of criticism without a specific reason why the specific use of this resolution is necessary for that criticism. All of our 1C, 2C, and 1 of our evidence will illustrate why the specific statement that we should substantially increase federal control throughout Indian country is not the statement to wrap their project around. Show linguistic stability, instability by saying that Jason Russell is a smooth character and that the federal government should substantially increase renewable energy use in the United States. God, I missed that topic, but don't use a statement that we should control and destroy native nations as the sick plaything of Bleeker's project. The cross-examination also illustrates another important point that I want to be on the flow. The act has to prove an offensive reason why we should walk away from this debate with any other lesson than the ceaseless rejection of federal control. In the end, they are behind the same eight ball that every other affirmative team has meant when they ran against when they were up against MSUCF. They have to read a slew of bad apologetic wood cards about how federal control can sometimes be good. Let me make it clear, if we prove federal control of native nations is the linchpin of genocide, we win the debate. By proving this, we win that the linguistic instability created by the circulation of a mission of the federal control can only open up spaces for further colonialism and genocide. Close the door, reject the topic as explained in the 2C. Remember, we don't need to claim that federal control is objectively always bad, even if that is way off. Even if that's way off, if we win the strategy of conceding of federal control as a vehicle for genocide is better for preventing the destruction of other people, that ultimately denying their agency more than the affirmative can never hope to liberate, then we win this debate. Now, affirming this topic with the wording of coercive federal control allows others to redeploy for coercive purposes. Sending a statement of negation is better. Hit it to 94 metaphors will also show up our thoughts and even our actions, calling a chess a battle or hearing someone else on the battle certainly encourages me to compete of it. However, if it happens, is a harsh and potentially violent competition. The way I think may turn affect my behavior. The metaphor I used to hurt some influence how I'll plan to test the battle and intimidate the battlefield. May seem more appropriate if the battle metaphor becomes popular in entire culture. May be led to the same conclusion and play chess accordingly. And our object link, the representation of Native Americans, keeps them in object status, sugarcoating the bill of racism, covering 2000 self-representing GC, the Chief CRP speech, and the little tree book of both representatives of glitches to secure the concurrence and yearning pull of the white readership to provide as responsible and respectful treatment of Native nations for materials of buffering myths around the Native Americans, keeping them within the object status as yearning pulls of familiar justified knowledge. Just this attempts to rewrite the history of any marginalizations as another white established, sugarcoating the bill of racial self-criticism, creating some similar problem of identity to protect the other of the American Indian. And finally, as the assumption that we can reform the broader system around themselves as export cases a narrative of redemption which ignores our own complicity and should be rejected. That atheist stories are told from the perspective of a member of the group that it's inflicted rather than suffered the injustice. This technique allows for the audience to imagine themselves in history from the perspective of the right-thinking white male. The identification is always with a character that is rather than essentially a oppressive situation and so allows viewers to distance themselves from responsibility for those actions. One may imagine if I were on the American frontier, I wouldn't have committed a genocide against Native Americans. I would have been Kevin Costner. It all becomes all too easy to believe I would have been a Nazi. But one makes Oscar Schindler a hero that's precisely the fact that most people were not like them. What the identification accomplishes is the overcoming of guilt through an act of imagination. What we would not have done, what we would have done, in fact, the distance between two pronouns marks the success as therapy and measures the extent which the film allows one not to take more responsibility for the past. This is to be understood as the management denial of structuring historical narratives around identification of the show. Also puts this in a mythical relationship. The audience is represented by a lead character, yet their character simultaneously represents something like its American soul. simply trauma marches at some level resonate with contemporary issues of racial politics, such as the resolution exonerates the audience of more than just a path harm. The religious exceptional character is the active one and all. Often the oppressive group is depicted as passively waiting to be saved by us. Racism is shown to be monstrous, but there's no possibility that we are monsters. The identification works as an invitation to ignore racial privilege, a commonplace of contemporary racial inequality, therefore appears they're not really as racist or as unimaginable. I also want to argue that we aren't a grand theory. They make the argument that we're a grand theory, exerting an exclusivity with their own transversal arguments, but we're a local theory specific to federal control within Native Nation in the country. It's not, we're not making any arguments about any kind of revolution. We're just saying that in this specific instance, the debate community would benefit more from a conception of rejection of the resolution rather than a reaffirmation or some kind of redeployment of the resolution because it is too risky in the case where genocide is ongoing. Now, specifically the case debate, I want you to understand our original DeLorean evidence and what is the explanation of I'll return. I'll isolate a couple of links, our leak arguments here from the 1AC and from the 2AC's explanation. The first is linear thinking. Our arguments that surround the 1AC, they make arguments as to how the debate community currently perceives the language of the resolution and how if they can exercise the reaffirmation or a vision that is counter to the current conception of the resolution, that can cause transverse of dissent and ultimately be more effective in being with the world. That's an argument using linear thinking, causing causal analysis between different conceptions and ways of rethinking. That leads to their own argument. Second is their substance of causality. I've isolated above how they can do how their argument they can make a transversal dissent and display dissension of transversal dissent allows them to claim capturing this kind of resistance. Also proves that they make substance of causality. Their DeLorean evidence reading the 1AC indicates this disrupts their ability to engage in this type of criticism, thereby derailing their arguments. If we win any of these essentially solves to take out the resistance strategy, that proves that our ability is magnified to generate offense as to how you should instead vote negative to reject the resolution at the final round of the CEDA nationals. Now, he says that of course we are review, but we can't make assumptions, etc. But extend our 1C evidence that they make that their types of transversal dissent are disseminated in a conception which only replicates the very arguments that their authors critique about how linear thinking and our substance of causality are the very reasons why they should be rejected. They talk about synthesizing different cultures, and cultures are cultural syntheticism is key, but the synthesis of cultures which leaves the door open to federal control. Our argument is that we should instead create visibility as per our Spanish evidence, the 1C, that allows for them for us to close our eyes as they run as people are liberated from the ability to solve that. They say practical forms of dissent are key and that there are middle ground for agency, but there are middle ground is essentially a sellout. Our argument is they have to prove why it's good for in this specific instance for a middle ground it's not a sellout. He says Spanish is a reason to vote affirmative, but the cross-examination proves the link to this argument that their ontology is bankrupted by the fact that in this specific instance they allow for the affirmation of federal control.
Remember our DeLorean evidence. It says we can't presume that we know the world, that we know the topic, that we know how language operates. By affirming the resolution as a vision, we can find new solutions to the problem. We can find a way within federal control that have never been conceptualized before. We grant there is no single vision, that there are no single visions, but that we need to invite an openness to many different visions. We're not denying that there is causality in the world. We don't deny that there are times when problem-solution logic is something of a beauty, is appropriate. But what we are saying is that when you exclude conceptions of things like they do with language, that is ethnocidal and should be rejected. They can't agree with everything they said. They try to do some kind of pick argument in this speech. When they walk away from the topic, that is something that differentiates us in a way that will give us sick offense. And they don't reject, and we believe that we can conceptualize those words in a federal control in a different way that will also be offense. I don't know if they can read the history of imperialism and Indian hate any faster. Don't run away from the topic. There are still some people who think that we can gain something for the very fact that Alfred came to us proves that there are some things that need to be shared, that we just can't walk away. There are things that we need to learn so we don't make the same mistakes again, and we don't get our fix from federal control. And like our evidence is that we need to open up concepts, that we can bust open those things, that they cannot be defined monologically or in their totality, but we need to recognize that federal control is constantly inverted. So we do this in the 1AC and the 2AC. When we say that federal control is constantly overturning, there can be management, or it can be the federal government to control its own ass. We think that is a productive thing, that inversion divides, that denies the possibility of monological definition, and we recognize that we are in genocide, that we are imperialistic, but that doesn't mean that we should walk away from the topic. Instead, that means that in the everyday that we should do what we can to resist forms of imperialism that are present in our lives. We should be oppositional intellectuals. Spanos in 93. Oh my God, this is small. The ultimate function of the institutionally certified is to exclude the marginal text and the class of text, the historically specific and differential play, which subvert the authority and power of the universalized canon. This exclusion or marginalization is accomplished not so much by censorship and hierarchical evaluation of accommodation to the canon, thus the breaking of the vertical pattern of determining the hierarchical relationship must be accompanied by the oppositional pedagogy that breaks the pyramidal structure of the core curriculum and liberates the differential forces to the cultivation called as the means of the dislocation of the canon from its transcendent heights and the area of free play criticism, or specifically the genealogical critique or the destruction of the narrative history that produced the canon. The oppositional must disassociate itself as far as possible from knowledge by deliberating, forgetting its resistance, by emerging a demystification of strange concepts. Also, Also, if you vote negative, you don't know what. If you vote negative, you don't know what happens. Their arguments are when you reduce their end to allow atrocity or alternative disasters. When you close your eyes, they just think that people will be able to run away freely. Well, our argument is that when you close your eyes, that the people that are most likely to speak out close their eyes, and the people run away, they will be clubbed by the hegemony. We think that our alternative is always better to keep your eyes open and do what you can. There are Farber and Sherry evidence is sick offense for us. It says basically it acts genocide. It says that it defames difference. It says that it said that when multiculturalism came into the university, that opened the door for people to deny the Holocaust. This is reduced to a univocal ethnocidal logic. Amygdala evidence is comparative. It says that we need to attend to science studies. We can't close our eyes. We have to see what those people have to say for us. What their argument does is basically enacts genocide. It says that there should, it's univocality and their stable truth arguments their stable truth evidence allows for the Holocaust. Hitler wasn't tentative about his desires to do violence to people. We believe that we should be on guard for those kinds of truth claims. Also, their two NC Spano evidence misinterprets the notion of spectrality. It's not hide and run away, but it's due with the Vietnam soldiers. So they didn't hide and stop fighting, but they used different tactics. They refused terms of engagement. That's what Bleicher evidence does. Evidence from Spanish 2000 for the obstacle thinker who has attended the ontological exile that he or she has been condemned by the global truth church and discourse of technological thinking. This also means the recognition of the exile condition of the science constitution and irreducible contradiction that in the truth of intermateriality, the shadow that haunts the light, the demand to be thought, the primary task of the marginalized intellect is the rethinking of the thinking itself.
Yeah.
They can't. This resolution is not something that can be defined monologically. Our argument is the affirmative transverses the notions of the topic. Our intrinsicness. They make arguments that it's not intrinsic to this topic, and they're right in some sense that every topic provides different ways that language inverts itself. But our intrinsicness comes from when we give the examples. The one you see about how Indian country reverses itself, how federal control and the topic areas all transverse themselves. That's a productive side that this resolution offers us. That helps us to be in the world with language in a different way. And we don't. Our advocacies are wrapped around the resolution. We bust the resolution wide open that denies the possibility of their grasping arguments, and they don't win if they prove that federal control's bad. Congratulations. You only win if you prove that we don't transverse those concepts, that we can't open those concepts up when they define it logically, they enact the ethnocidal logic and the dominance that Bleicher talks about. And look, we get sick offense from our Mignola and Bleicher card. It says that the universal approach to language is ethnocide and domination. It's ridiculous to assume that federal control was always bad. Policies that would clean up your rating would benefit people. Policies that give casinos to indigenous peoples benefit people. Even the worst policies are productive and destructive. When they define those concepts monologically, they suck us into a too simplistic world. You should affirm the topic as every data as transversal to understand that we can't look at the world and we can't approach the world as something that's natural, that we can make laws about it. It's natural and graspable. Also, our Deloria evidence is a double turn. It doesn't assume an absolute rejection of causality or problem solution of the problem solution mindset. Deloria is specific about how in certain contexts we can do everyday descent, but the problem solution at some level is inevitable. I'm going to get drunk after this round. I will drink beer. That doesn't mean that I am tired. That doesn't mean that I an imperialistic problem solution mindset. An affirmation of a vision doesn't attempt to solve all of Western thinking. The 1AC says that we need to rethink when we can, that we need to do things when we can, that we need to speak out when we can. That slow transformation of values is key. That the ballot for us doesn't solve everything, but in this round it's a form of dissent against that imperialism. Keep your freaking eyes open.
Right, so Tyler Durden starts out by mailing nasty emails, by subverting the regime of capitalism from inside, by peeing in the food of the rich, etc. All these things by challenging the system he's locked within. But in the end, a bunch of zealots shave their heads and join his cause and blow up buildings, and Robert Paulson dies. Remember that his name was Robert Paulson. His name was the Affirmative Project. The challenge is understood violently. They recreate the system of domination and uniformity that they fought. The debate community is not a bunch of shaved head goons, granted, but the transversal resistance of the affirmative can lead to bad effects. Their project may indeed be personally transformative. It may be fascinating. It may make them better people, but we're the only ones controlling the way that their project can be understood by other people, the way that the federal imperial system can manipulate the object of control, the way that they can redefine that vision. We're the only ones reading evidence about it. We're the only ones reading evidence about the way that federal control is redeployed in the real world. Look, they may win a bunch of their arguments. They may win that their interpretation of the topic is multivocal, that there's a bunch of different ways of understanding the text of the resolution, etc. These may be true, but they are not a good result. This is not something that we should propagate. Our evidence is amazing on this point. Our Collins and Hall evidence has no answer to it. In the 1AR, there's no answer to it. In the 2AC, that there is no single answer. Granted, that their visions that there are many visions and ways of understanding things. However, these visions are defined by a dominant culture. They're defined by control. In other words, that their understanding of these things cannot escape the notions that they've already been tied into. Our Barber and Sherry evidence is fantastic on this point as well. Look, they've conceded our framework for this debate, which is essentially that we are the guards of reservations. We are the guards of concentration camps, and our question is how we deal with the people inside. Do we understand what they're doing? Do we understand how they get away? Do we map their tunnels and find out where they're going and which houses will hide them and ask them where and why they're leaving? And no, of course not. They've conceded our argument that we are an intellectual resource, that our community is one of debate and understanding and interpretation of these things. It could easily be mined for non-productive purposes as much as it could be mined for productive purposes. We know a lot about this topic. We know a lot about the continuation of genocide, etc. But the topic ends here. This is the last negative speech that we will give on this topic. This is the last R that you will hear about Native Americans and federal control. Is it, do you want to endorse the topic or do you want to reject it? Do you want to endorse federal control or do you want to reject it? Their interpretation isn't even clear. They can't tell you what it is. It's just a vision. It's a redefinition. It's a radical change. It's a rupture. It's a break. But it's a rupture and break that will be re-diverted to the means of genocide. Our Freeburg evidence is fantastic on this point. That we should not attempt to answer the questions. That we should not create a new vision. Rather, if we understand these things, we should let this knowledge come to us. We agree with most of their project, but we will internally turn it. What do we do now that we have that knowledge? And we do have that knowledge. The answer is that we don't participate in a system of colonialism. That's two pieces of Alfred evidence, and the 1 and C are excellent on this point as well. That now that we may not be able to change the system. In fact, we cannot change the system. However, our actions within it do matter. Do we dirty our hands with it, or do we try and escape? Our Drennan evidence is the only historical evidence that discusses the nature of federal control. It says that Dylan S. Meyer indeed intended to change the system of federal control. That he intended to help Native Americans, but in the end, his experience in the War Relocation Board was just experience to run Native American camps as well. That all of these things are continuing. The federal control doesn't get redeployed, no matter how we interpreted our Galoob evidence and not answered in the 1AR either. That they essentially distance themselves from the system of imperialism. If we think that we can make radical ruptures, we are just making it easier to swallow the bitter pill of racial self-criticism. We are sugarcoating this pill. It's our Crumry evidence that we all like to think, look, if I was on the frontier, I wouldn't be Custer. I would be someone great. I would be Kevin Costner. I would love the Native Americans. I would participate in genocide. How true is that? Do you really think? How much do any of you really do about it? Little. Our argument is that we should not continue to mine Native Americans for resources that could eventually be used to destroy them. They have no answer to this evidence. Our Hibbett's evidence also says that the way that they understand these things, the way that they talk about them, spread through society in ways that they do not intend. If we describe chess as a game of war, for example, and people hear the metaphor, they understand chess as a game of war. In this context, federal control is not a game. It is genocide, and we should understand it that way and not contribute to it. They say that they can find new solutions, etc., new openness, but their multicultural solutions are exactly the thing that we critique. Our Spanos evidence answers this argument, says that there are strategies that those who are not part of the imperial system can use, can turn against it, that the victims can turn back upon it because they are not co-opted by its gaze. We are not these people, an argument that they concede, and our vision is not a liberatory one, but rather it's one that can destroy people. They say that Alfred spoke here and that we should run away from the topic. Alfred told us that federal control was bad. Remember the argument I made in the 2NC that we asked him, someone asked him, can you redefine federal control in a good way? No, and no is the answer to this one. Federal control might be subverting itself, maybe the temple is falling down upon itself, but it should be fine to collapse on its own, thank you, and perhaps we should do things that can subvert this argument. They conceded an argument about resources that is above. They read their evidence about oppositional intellectuals. This is true. However, how do you become this oppositional intellectual? Their evidence just says that we should perform these things within the canon, something that we do. We have a better strategy than they do. We oppose federal control. We are oppositional in the sense we don't hide behind historical things. We're the only ones reading these historical examples. They say that they can change things. You don't know what happens if you vote negative. You don't know what happens if you vote affirmative either. You have a fairly good idea that this transversal dissent, if it's effective, is a cultural motive that can only be reappropriated. Our Freeburg evidence says that we hate the idea that we're complicit with genocide. The more that we get excuses to inflict violence on other people, the more we use them. They critique our Barber and Sherry evidence, say that it criticizes multiculturalism. This evidence says that multiculturalists didn't intend their arguments to be used this way, but it's how it was deployed. Their argument that we should critique everything we've learned on this topic, that our knowledge should constantly question, is not applicable in this instance, because for genocide, you should not question these things. They say that Hitler was resolute. This is true. The federal government is resolute as well, and we shouldn't collude with the system. Our Barber and Sherry evidence simply says that the rejection of knowledge and constant questioning is bad in some cases. It allows us to deny the past as much as it allows us to affirm it. They have no evidence that the result of their project was good. Their glory evidence doesn't talk about Native Americans. It doesn't talk about federal control. Our evidence is our Spanos evidence that the Native Americans should use these tactics, that they should turn against the system, but also that they should remain unseen. They say that they talk about the topic as a site, but this site is one that should be rejected. Is the argument that I've made above. They say that we don't make any attempt to solve. No, neither do you. Our argument is that you don't have to make a progressive attempt to solve it. You should at least not be worse.
The question you have to ask yourself after the round is can resistance occur within this round? The negative suggests that you should just walk away from the resolution and say no to it. Our argument is that to engage the resolution to affirm the resolution as a vision. This fundamentally challenges traditional notions of affirmation. They granted out all of our arguments by, for instance, being able to rupture these different systems of linguistic domination that provides the reason why you should vote affirmative. That allows us to transgress and turn language into a form of liberation from our conceptions, the ways in which language necessarily constrains the way in which we can act. That for this provides us a direct offense into the Deloria evidence, because that evidence talks about how when we have these narrow ways of viewing language and viewing the world, that necessarily we engage in acts of domination. That's why we should rupture this title of affirmation. That's a reason why to vote affirmative rather than vote negative, so that we can resist those traditional notions of federal control. Our argument is not that you defend federal control. The best thing they've got is some sort of rhetorical criticism, but they have not justified any sort of constitution or rhetorical constitution or anything. They just say that when you walk away from this round, somebody may look at the ballot and then say, hey, the affirmative ones, however, how this round is represented elsewhere is irrelevant. They think that you'll give the legitimacy of the resolution. However, it's just likely you'll say, oh, it was the fourth. They weren't topical anyway. Our argument is we're not claiming that they are a traditional they don't reside within universal truth. However, we do not assume that they do either. But we still have a link to our Deloria evidence, because our Deloria evidence talks about how these specific plans of action where you could just reject all federal control and it fails to reorient our manner of perceiving the world. The Deloria evidence is talking about specific plans of action, saying, like, for instance, in bilingual education programs and college application programs and things like that. We always enact these programs, however, they fail to account for our fundamental orientation towards the world. Now, it seems that they would be endorsing that as well. However, in the fact when they by rejecting federal control, however, it's still the same situation where the hegemony that it thinks that it knows better for the silent societies that our amygdala evidence talks about, that we need the silent societies to be part of our planetary production of knowledge before we make these decisions about these complete rejection of federal control. Even as their Collins and Hull evidence says, we need multiple different visions. In the last line of the evidence talks about how dominant society's visions must stand beside those of Indian people's. Argument is that we allow for that standing beside rather than complete rejection. The complete rejection of that style of thinking only shows an amount of disrespect for that culture, which is not what the Deloria evidence is talking about. Even the Deloria evidence that they read, our argument is a synthesis between those many different cultures and the ways in which we can come to grips with the ways of being in the world to resist domination is to show respect for different cultures, to show respect for for those different ways of approaching the world. This respect is accomplished through, specifically in affirmation, they win their arguments about how we engage in instrumental rationality and things like that. However, that is combined with other ways of affirmation of the resolution, as well as the fact, look, their Barber and Cherry evidence loses them the debate in the sense that shows the competition in this round, because what they do is they want to set these stable foundational truths. Now, they won't say those are universal truths. However, that notion of stable truths shows the competition in this round. They cannot capture our affirmative in the sense that because they insist on those foundations. Now, the Farber and Cherry evidence, they talk about how we need to have those in order to resist the Holocaust, or will have Holocaust denial. However, remember, he grants in the 2 and R that style of thinking that says it knows the absolute truth, or it has a stable foundational truth, is what justified the Holocaust, because the Germans were able to objectively call the Jews and the Gypsies and a whole plethora of other people as a scourge on society. And he says that, ironically enough, the federal control was able to do the same thing with Native Americans. That is our argument, that when you have these notions of truth and then you base your decisions on those notions of truth, then that leads to domination. Our Deloria evidence is excellent, as well as the Mignola evidence. Remember that they cannot capture the 1EC because of the Farber and Cherry evidence. It contextualizes their solution within this round. Now, remember as well, our Spanos evidence, which talks about how we can be oppositional intellectuals within the context of this debate round, the context of the academy. The last part of this evidence that Joe reads in the 1AR says the oppositional intellectuals must dissociate as far as possible, but not by obliterating or forgetting its existence, by engaging in it from the demystified and strange perspective of its genealogical origin. And affirmation of the resolution allows us to engage in that genealogical origin, such that we can challenge those foundations. We shouldn't just ignore them. We shouldn't just walk away from them. We shouldn't just forget that it exists, as well as their Spanos evidence. As Joe makes the argument, and I don't think it's handled, it's the idea that they're miscontextualizing Spanos' notion of spectral invisibility, because and Joe reads the card about how the spectral silence means thinking it's a strategy. Like, for instance, the Vietnamese soldiers who use many different tactics of opposition. For instance, they guerrilla warfare and things like that. Doesn't mean that you become invisible or you disappear or anything like that, or you close your eyes. Rather, the task of the oppositional intellectual is to actually engage those structures of domination only from a position in which they don't assume those truth discourses. They talk repeatedly about how we get redeployed by Freeburg or something like that. I don't even know how redeployment occurs in this context because our argument is about how we can be open to the different ways of being in the world. Our Delorian evidence says that can contribute to a slow transformation of values. There, the Delorian evidence as well, where I read the underlined part, only contributes to that, the idea of the synthesis between those many different cultures. Our affirmation is that the resolution has a vision, that is, it denies those traditional notions of instrumental rationality in which the words move from one word to the next. They give, again, the example Alfred. However, remember, our argument is necessarily Alfred came here because he thought that there was something valuable in this community. If he felt that we should just say no and walk away from this resolution, then he wouldn't have showed up to this activity because it's valuable to affirm those different ways of being in the world, and it's valuable to show respect to these different cultures. The negative would just have you walk away and totally reject those things. As walking away, remember Joe's argument well about how walking away necessarily means that, or closing your eyes means that you get clubbed in the back. Well, your eyes are closed because we need to examine those different forms of domination. They have the glue evidence about distancing. However, the alternative for this is far worse. The idea that we can't have that style of resistance. Instead, it's not just a oh, this makes me feel better. However, this is a way in which we can participate in the slow transformation of values.
And in the final round of the 2002 CEDA National Tournament, the decision is a 5-4 for the affirmative Fortes.
So I get to start. And I need to say that this is one of the best debates that I've heard in my 3,070 billion. Oh, thank you. No, I don't want to say all this in front of everyone in the room. This is one of the best debates I've heard in a million debates. And I will also say that I was one of the dissenters. And I will also say that I found Fort Hays to be a very challenging team to lead a squad against of thousands. And also, in some ways, I considered this debate to be about the teacher, which you have been in many ways, to this circuit. And in my opinion, despite an extremely close debate, the students, which were the rest of us and were represented in an amazing performance by Michigan State, bested the teacher. And I can talk about that more specifically, but I don't want to. And the reason I don't want to is because I sort of feel that way about debate in general. The student often bests the teacher, because if you invite an entire circuit to work against you, they will often find a way to do that. So the fact that you won this and that it was a 5-4 reflected a fine debate, and I know you're bummed out, and oh my God, you got Melissa, the old lady, so that really dooms you. So, what I also want to acknowledge is the way debate changes. And one of the judges on this panel is the first, and it's the first African-American woman that's ever judged this. And she voted for you guys and you won, and since I was her teacher and she's besting me in this decision, I think she should start.
All right. I had no intention of starting. Okay, well, Melissa put me on the spot. I think there are two questions that I have to ask myself at the end of the debate from both sides. I think the first is, do I support or reject the resolution? It's my last act of the year. And I think that's an important question that you all bring up. Is that something that I'm willing to do? I'm persuaded by the arguments from the 2NR that a flat-out rejection of federal control has some positive aspects of it. It might allow us to have new visions. It is a rejection of participation in the colonial project. Alfred says that it can be deployed, that federal control cannot be deployed positively, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that there are arguments that Fort Hays has that I think that swing that argument, for me at least. For instance, their argument that it assumes a static notion of what federal control has to be, i.e. you've already answered the question of what federal control has to be and said that we have to reject that. I think it's something that you all aren't dealing well enough with for me to sign my ballot your way. I think that their argument that, that assumption in and of itself is a part of the imperial project and leads to ethnocide is persuasive. And I think that unless we are able to in some way redefine what that means, or at least to attempt to realize that there's no static notion of it that we have to begin with, at least it's problematic, I think, as far as voting for the negative. I don't think that's something that I feel like you've answered very well for me, what the result is if I believe that, we can redeploy federal control to attempt to break up the text that it is or that it's assumed to be. And I don't think you get out of the argument that, it is what we assume it is. Federal control is something negative, it's something bad, it's something evil, but I think you make that assumption itself without making the other, questioning the argument of whether or not that assumption itself somehow plays into the imperial project itself. I don't think that argument's necessarily answered in the 2NR. I also think that there are arguments about why you have to engage both sides in order to recreate this vision is supported by some of the evidence that even you are reading. I think that a lot of the evidence in many ways weighs toward the affirmative and making arguments about how that new vision occurs, how we have to be resist these types of things. And some of your evidence says that the way to do that is to resist through silence, but their evidence is much better that talks about why silence as a means of resistance is what allows you to be redeployed or become complicit in whatever it is that's going on. And their argument that we place these types of ways of knowing on the same level instead of separating them and letting one go one way and the other go the other way seems to be persuasive. I'm not sure it's something that you all are answering back, and it's problematic for me at least that your evidence seems to support that, the parts that they read that you don't read, etc. The last question that I have to ask myself is, will the 1AC project be redeployed despite what their intention is? And I think that the question of how the project is perceived by others is an important one, determining whether or not we reject the resolution or whether or not we support it at the end of this round. But I think that the end result is that both sides risk co-optation in some essence. That you both risk doing violence to Native Americans, or you both risk doing violence to this project of attempting to resist. The question is, which one of those do I think does less violence? And since the weight of your evidence seems to support that there is some benefit to some type of active resistance, and that, their evidence, particularly the Lauria evidence, which I think is really persuasive to me, argues that, we've got to do this through this type of active resistance. It means that we can't just ignore that there are other voices, other ways of knowing out there in favor of just saying that federal control means this and it has to be rejected. And so in the end, I decide that, I think the 1AC project could be redeployed, but so I also think the negatives project could be redeployed. And I think that, I'm not willing to just say flat out reject the resolution in front of an affirmative that's saying that that rejection in and of itself is a silence, is a redeployment of the Imperial Act. And I'm not sure if I vote negative what that would do for us or what that would do for me. So.